Well, it's so nice to see so many people coming to these pre-concert Meet the Artist events. That's what we hoped would happen, and it seems like it is. So it's a chance to get to know the person behind the music, which is a really special thing. So Jason, first question.
Yeah.
You travel all over the world. You teach at Curtis, at the Cleveland Institute of Music. You record. You play chamber music. You have a family. How the heck do you do it all?
Time organization. And over the years, I've begun, I really appreciate, especially with kids, like the investment that I made early on, even while I was a bachelor student at Cleveland Institute of Music, studying with John Holmquist, I began to really think a little bit more about if I want to get X amount of hours of practice, and then I have X amount hours of, homework, theory homework, and playing gigs and socializing, that I was going to have to think. Those are kind of like the early days of actually having a schedule book, like remember those black day planners that you wrote in? Actually, my teacher, Holmquist, actually would suggest every year to the incoming class that they get a book and start practicing writing in their schedule in it. And my wife actually, we kind of do a purge every 3 or 4 years of stuff, but she's like, do you want to keep this? She's like, when had the date on it, had the year on it, was like 1992. And I was like, oh no, we got to keep that. Because that's like, a lot of memories, in just things like programming. Later on that developed into the professional mode, where juggling repertoire, which now I use the Notes app on the iPhone, and that's constantly refreshed. And sometimes even we have, the nice thing, you could share things with musicians, or share sort of things with the wife for the goals for that week and that kind of thing. So yeah, it kind of started all the way back there, really.
You must have it down with how to fit your practice time into really small increments.
Yeah. That's, the amount that I can get done in an hour, say, of practice is probably 3 times the amount of progress that from, like, say, 30 years ago. I think that kind of has to happen if you're going to take on more work.
And I'm curious to know, how do you see your students going forward? What do you encourage them to do? What advice are you giving them? How do you launch them into their careers?
Well, really, each one is very different, and I think for me as a teacher, my job is to find out where their strengths are and where their weaknesses are, get them to really embrace their strengths, because some students, some young people are, they are very they go all into their strengths without developing some weaknesses, and vice versa, and everything in between. And so I like to and also you got to take each individual personality and get to know them in the lesson. You only have 1 hour a week, and then you got your ensembles and then seminar class. You really get to know them in seminar class, which is kind of like a performance class, kind of master class type of situation. That's often when you get to really know when their personality opens up, because they're a little bit more relaxed, because then they're around their peers. And then there's, of course, some students that kind of clam up in front of their peers. So it's a challenge, You got to kind of take each one as its own kind of project in a way.
Could you talk a little bit more about the major influences, like from jazz, rock and roll even?
Yeah.
All the things you pull in and that influence you, and maybe your heroes in those fields too.
There's too many to mention. Like, basically, I'm a Gen Xer, so any of you guys heard of Eddie Van Halen? Right? So Eddie Van Halen, for guitar, like non-classical guitar, like as an electric guitarist, basically was to Gen X what Jimi Hendrix would have been to the Boomer generation. He was that influential, he was that revolutionary, and created an entirely new technique and a whole Library of Congress vocabulary to go along with it. So yeah, I mean, he blew everybody's mind when we were 10, 12, and Van Halen was a great band. So like in the rock thing, that was a big thing. My dad's record collection when I was a little kid, 3, 4, 5 years old, was entirely modern jazz, so I had the sound of that in my ear, and then I got the bug of that kind of late in high school and then in college and this kind of thing, and then I kind of went down that path to sort of backwards in time, to Weather Report, Herbie Hancock, Miles Davis, and I kind of worked all the way, and I investigated, like I was just so curious about the music, and then I learned how to improvise. I was actually a semi-professional, very mediocre jazz guitarist around Cleveland, right, where I then sort of set up shop. I actually got to the point where I was getting calls from people I didn't know and saying, "Oh, Dave, the pianist, said recommended you," and that was kind of for me. That was like really exciting because of all my heroes in that field, Pat Metheny was like a big influence on me musically. But again, it's not, and I'm going to sort of, a lot of people have asked me, so does that work its way into your classical interpretation? And the answer is like, absolutely not. Like, I really try to, I really hope to sort of when I'm playing Bach and none of that, all that is very separate kind of stuff, And also I was 10, so again, very big Gen X kind of thing. When I was 10, Run DMC's first album came out, and that was the first hip hop thing ever on MTV. And so that's a big kind of, and I went down that path with my brother and then my friend and a couple friends in high school, and then it just exploded in the 90s, But by then I was already a professional, so I lost track of it.
Well, that leads into a little bit more maybe about your childhood and did someone push you, or you could have, you were in Buffalo, right? So you could have been playing hockey or
yes, which I loved desperately. I loved hockey. But my parents, I came from a pretty blue-collar background. As I've said it probably in many interviews, I come from a long line of coal passers. You guys know what a coal passer is? They shovel the coal into the furnaces on the lake boats. Actually, my dad's side of the family has a long lake boat history of, and factory workers and stuff like that. My mom was a secretary. My mom's family was even poorer than my father's family, but it was kind of a thing where they didn't, because I was listening to my parents' records so much from 3, 4, 5. My mother's record collection was awesome. All the good stuffs, all the R&B, soul, Motown, Stax, Aretha, Wilson Pickett, Four Tops, Temptations, like and then some British Invasion, things like the Animals, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, 45s and things like that, and some of the Bay Area things, Mamas and the Papas, and Lovin' Spoonful and things like that. So my mom's thing was like, she liked music that she could dance to, and you could dance, like the early Beatles stuff was like very danceable kind of music. So I had those two kind of things going on, and so my mother I would listen to my parents' records like anywhere from like 3, 4, 5 hours a day. And so my mom bought me a $50 guitar, not realizing that it was a classical guitar. It was a nylon string guitar, just like this, but about 2/3 of the size. And I just knocked around on it until the Buffalo Guitar Quartet came to my school. If they hadn't done an outreach program in my cafeteria at my school, and my mother did a lot of secretary jobs because she could type like 60, 70 words a minute. So she had that job at my elementary school for like 2 or 3 years. So she happened to be there. And so if those two things weren't in place, like I would have watched them and then just went to my next class. But she said, she was like, oh, my son plays the same kind of guitar. She'd never seen anyone that played that kind of guitar before, right? Like she thought it was like a Spanish guitar. She had actually bought me a classical guitar. So I started studying at age, like right around my 8th birthday with Jeremy Sparks, and that's kind of how it all started. My parents never really had to tell me to practice, and I really just kind of dove in. And
I love hearing those stories about outreach. I've heard them from other really great musicians. For example, someone once told me that from a wonderful, really well-known string quartet, she said, if the outreach program had not come to my school and did what they did, which was, she said, they played, I wish I were an Oscar Mayer Wiener, but they played it so well that it was so clear that this was
I've heard
something
that song
extraordinary.
played terribly, and so I can tell you that when it's played well, it's really, really great. Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. No, but seriously, that's exactly it. It's like she was in the right place at the right time. So yeah, and it's not for everybody either. I mean, that's not going to happen to every. We all kind of know it's like that's not going to happen with every kid. Like I said, I just thought it was another music or acting or sort of comedian act coming to my, whatever, for like show and tell. It was like show and tell type of thing to me, but I didn't even connect it with my own guitar. I didn't make the connection at all, but of course my mother was watching and she's like, that's what those are the guitar lessons he should have, is that.
Those mothers, right?
Those moms, yep.
Can you talk a little bit about the change in your mindset and anything else that happens when you go from being a soloist to playing chamber music?
Yeah, well, concerto playing and chamber music playing and rehearsing and that kind of thing are a little bit more similar. Like the thing about solo playing is you can craft a lot of things, and you are essentially the conductor. You are the orchestra, and you're in control of all. The guitar is actually a really wonderful polyphonic instrument. It's kind of like a cross between a piano, the polyphony of a piano, and the singing with the vibrato. You get some vibrato and color and these kind of things here. So of like the string family, a little bit. It's kind of, I always kind of heard it as that, a little bit of a hybrid of those two instrumental worlds there. Yeah, I think with that, it's with solo playing though, you can control all of those elements of color, articulation, and get it exactly the way you want to do it, right? Whereas what I love about chamber music more than anything really strengthened my solo playing gradually over time, in the fact that you have to be, and this is the really important thing to teach classical guitar students about chamber music, is you have to be very alert. If you go into rehearsal preparing your part like a solo part, like a nuclear weapon, right? Like it's like a diamond, you're gonna make the gig like that much harder, because then everybody in the ensemble has to kind of stop, not do what they're doing. It's very much a collaborative, of course, it's a collaborative art, and things happen in the moment, and you have to react. I call it antenna, like, to my students. You have to develop the chamber music antenna.
Jason,
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Beth.
It's so
Thank
great
you.
to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you.